Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 13th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, is Mike Robinson, and we will be joined by Alex Thomson from the Netherlands with Eastern approaches. Well, we survived the storm, Mike, which is good.
Storm?
Well, apparently there was a storm.
Didn't notice too much, but
well,
anyway.
we were lucky. I think we were a bit lucky down south because a few people did have a bad time, but the country survived, surprisingly.
Well, will free speech survive, or are we going to be censored into oblivion? That's the question. And today we're going to begin with the Internet Governance Forum, the UK Internet Governance Forum meeting, which is taking place today. Now, the UK Internet Governance Forum they describe themselves as a collaborative partnership between Nominet and the UK's Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, some key parliamentarians in amongst that as well, and other organisations. Their aim, they say, is to provide a local forum in the UK that engages industry, government, parliament, academia and civil society in debate on the internet governance issues, as well as encouraging partnerships and coalitions that deliver solutions and demonstrates best practice to others to learn from. So this is excellent stuff.
It's all very cuddly, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's all, trust us, we're here for your benefit.
Absolutely. So today, this year's UK Internet Governance Forum meeting, the annual meeting, is taking place today in London. Well, a number of things on the agenda. Cybersecurity is a big issue. Matthew Hancock was giving a ministerial address. We'll come on to that in a second. They were talking about education. They will be talking about education and online safety because we've all got to be informed digital citizens. They're talking about mental health and accessibility online, which is all about the impact of the internet and social media on mental health. I think the more that you use social media, the less mentally well you are, Brian. I think that's the case. And then the next one is the best one of the day, how to combat fake news. This is a panel debate which will address what responsibilities social media companies have as platforms for publishers to counter the dissemination of fake news. Yep. Should they be subject to stricter editorial guidelines? And what is the role of commercial drivers in targeting certain information to users? And then that's going to be followed by a session on blockchain and digital currencies. And that's quite topical as well, as we'll see later on in the programme. But as I say, Matthew Hancock was giving his ministerial address. And I wanted to highlight some of the things that he was saying because it really is quite spectacular. He said that today I want to talk about what we need to do to harness the internet's exponential power while preventing harm and abuse. Yeah. He said this happens because the internet is open and free. And in the battle to keep it open and free, even the most ardent supporter of new technology like me needs to acknowledge that untrammeled and in the wrong hands, the power of the internet and big data pose serious risks that even digital enthusiasts like us must be alive to. There you go. Right. He said, as we learn, when we move from adolescence to maturity, coming of age means taking responsibility for our actions. So he's basically suggesting that the internet is coming of age, it's finally growing up, and it needs to grasp responsibility with two hands. He said we must build an internet based on liberal rather than libertarian values and cherish freedom, yet prevent harm to others.
Well, there's some interesting discussion there, liberal versus libertarian.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our task is to strike a balance between freedoms and responsibilities online so that the solutions can be applied globally. Just this morning on the Today programme, you may have heard Evan Williams, co-founder of Twitter, make the same point. And he quotes Evan Williams as saying, you can be an ardent believer in free speech and also realize that someone's speech can limit someone else's willingness to speak. So this is right. Fantastic. The internet too, Matthew Hancock said, is a British invention. And so once again, Britain must lead the way in bringing the two together and applying liberal values to the culture of the digital world. You play a crucial part in this global leadership. From the common law to the standard railway truck gauge, Britain has often played its role in ages past. Let us do so once again in today's new digital world. So Matthew Hancock wants to shut us all up because they've lost control of the narrative. And they recognize the power of the internet. That power has got to be diminished in terms of freedom and expanded in terms of control?
Well, absolutely, Mike. A little bit later, we're going to have a look at another government grab for power, but it seems to me they're desperate about this. Don't know what Alex, what do you think about this one? The state getting worried at the power of the internet?
Oh, definitely the state's getting worried about the internet, Brian, and I think that the internet is the sole, certainly the main and probably the sole institution or facility that there is in the world which has stopped the New World Order from going right ahead in the early 90s when it broke out of its cage. Because, of course, just in the wake of that, in the mid-90s, the internet got going, and slowly at first, but the trickle soon became a flood, a lot of information came out, much of it self-contradictory, but the same is true of the mainstream narratives. They're self-contradictory too. So people have become adults, to use Hancock's metaphors. They've become adult connoisseurs of information. They've grown up, and that's, I think, what the government can't stand. And as for libertarian versus liberal, I'm not a political libertarian, but I would say some of our viewers are. And libertarian was coined as a phrase because liberal had ceased to have its original 19th century meaning. So it's another case of hijacking words. And by rejecting libertarianism, the establishment is actually rejecting the original, well-based 19th century version of liberalism, which is leave each to pursue what he can without harming others. That is what we're being told we can't do anymore. Cameron put it best, didn't he, saying we're no longer going to be a passively tolerant society towards people who stay within the law. So it's liberalism in the classic sense, which has been rejected here.
Well, if that's what they're talking about with the internet, of course, one of their big worries is what's coming down the pipe in terms of the younger generation. And so the British Council, alongside Demos, has released a new report entitled "How Does the Next Generation in the UK See Its Future?" How willing are young people to take part in politics and society, they ask. Our research showed plenty of skepticism about the political system. Politicians are, quotes, out of touch with what the average UK citizen thinks, said one respondent. We found that 71% of respondents thought it was either very or fairly important to engage with Westminster politics. They want to feel engaged. They want their concerns on housing, education, lack of jobs to be heard and acted upon. This generation is socially conscious and active. They campaign, they volunteer, and yes, they vote. Much of their activism takes place online through social media, despite the fact that such channels may be unwieldy and unreliable sources of information. But our research also suggests that young people are aware of this and would like to be helped to navigate this better and turn collectivism, social action taken through the medium of online petitions, into real change. But Brian, what the British Council here and Demos suggesting is that young people are begging to be helped in the process of being activists.
I think this is true. The other thing is, I find it remarkable, or maybe not, that British Council is working alongside Demos, because of course Demos was a Marxist-based organisation in its foundation. It would deny that pretty strongly. But I think what we've got here is the British Council and Demos are actually measuring the success of policies which they've helped influence. They are looking at how they have managed to change the minds of young people. I think this is very deep, sinister stuff when you start to get in at that level.
Yeah. Alex, right at the core of this whole discussion, of course, is the fact that we have a number of large corporations that are effectively monopolies, and Google being one of the key monopolies here, because of course they control how easy it is to find information on the internet. But from Russia, we seem to have news suggesting that Yandex perhaps is attempting to move ahead in competition.
Yes, Yandex, for those who don't know, is the Russia-based search engine, which in the late 90s got going because searches in Cyrillic were not well catered for by Google's algorithms in those days. But since then, it's become a Russia-specific search engine so that people can put in questions. The one that's used in this video, which has been copied by Russia Insider from the main public broadcaster, Channel 1 in Russia, the question that they use as an example there is people can type into Yandex, when do the communal boilers shut down for the summer maintenance, which is a question only relevant to Russia and apartment buildings there. So Yandex had that advantage, but of course, being Russia, it's used its high-tech innovation to develop features which lazy Google, having the world monopoly, wasn't interested in developing. And now it's been helped along by Russian legislation, and in this case, the decision of the Monopolies Commission that it was an unfair advantage to build in on the apps that people use and in the browsers that they use on their smartphones to build in Google as the default search engine. So anyone updating their Android-based phone, not yet iPhones, but Android-based phones in Russia, has been forced by law now, so that whenever they update their system, they'll get a question, which was the thing shown on screen, to choose their default search system. And this is expected to raise from a few percent to perhaps half the population of Russia in a short time those who actively know about and choose to use a Russian-designed search engine which doesn't filter things out for political sensitivity.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Right, well,
I just smile there and comment very quickly that it's remarkable if we think back to Cold War days, what was happening one side, and of course we were the bastions of free speech, supposedly, and now we see things flipping the other way. It's quite remarkable.
Absolutely. Now, yesterday we were mentioning Zapad 2017, this joint strategic exercise in Belarus involving Russia, and the allegations that NATO was throwing around that there were going to be 100,000 personnel involved in this. And of course, Jens Stoltenberg pretty upset about it. He said, we've seen before that Russia has used big military exercises as a disguise or a precursor to aggressive military actions against their neighbors. Well, I just wanted to highlight this article from TASS, because of course, really to highlight how the Russians view the activities of NATO on this, because we mentioned the fact that NATO is running yet another exercise of its own on a much smaller scale, of course. But the point that the Russian generals here are making is that it's the number of Western military drills which are right up against Russian borders, that these keep growing. They're saying that in late September, Poland is set to hold a Dragon exercise involving 17,000 personnel and 3,500 pieces of military hardware. And in fact, drifting around Twitter today, and I think on Russia Today, there's some live footage of the military hardware getting off aircraft for that exercise. The number of exercises, according to this TASS article, that Western countries hold near Russian borders keeps growing. And this is according to the Western Military District Commander. He said, according to our information, about 50 combat training events have been held on the territory of Europe since June. Some 60,000 people took part in them, including US servicemen. Moreover, the number of military exercises near Russian borders has been constantly growing. So, you know, Russia getting concerned about this. But Alex, you wanted to highlight this particular story about NATO drills, that Bulgarian soldiers had refused to shoot targets with Russian signs, because one of the points that I was making last week on this issue was that the Zapad exercise is all about internal defense, whereas the NATO exercises seem to be based on scenarios of external foes driving across borders, and that seems to be what this one's about.
It does, yes, and as Newsfront has reported, this throws up one of the fault lines in NATO's new helpers and the EU's new member states as well in the Balkans. And the particular fault line is between pro-Russian Bulgaria, which is an Eastern Orthodox and Cyrillic writing country, and Romania, which uses the Latin script and is largely Roman Catholic and has some Orthodox but westward looking. Now, the thing that's not mentioned in this article, which I think is crucial, is that Romania has got a strategic partnership on the go with the French, particularly the French General Staff, which under Macron have got very definite plans, as I'm now sensing, to be Europe's leading military within the EU structure. So I don't think everything's going to be German-controlled ultimately, even if it's a Franco-German partnership. And France has, a long time ago, in fact, because it's another Latin-based language like Romania, France actually used Romania as a kind of bridgehead in Eastern Europe for aggression against Russia. And we covered on a recent Balkan edition, which we're going to release soon, that the same is true of France using Poland between the wars. So Romania is basically becoming an outlier for French and ultimately US plans in the region. And it was these Romanians who gathered these basically scrap Cyrillic signs and put them up on the front of buildings. And the Bulgarians in the exercise who said, no, we're absolutely not going to shoot up Russian signs. Who do you think we are? These are our ethnic and religious brothers. So there are serious cracks appearing in the NATO front line. But you've been covering recently, of course, that this Zapad or West exercise by Russia and Belarus is basically a needed response to very large numbers of countries from Finland all the way down to Greece and Turkey being used simultaneously in role-playing games. So watch this space, and particularly watch Romania, which has potential to become quite a bully boy in the region on behalf of France and the US.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alex. Now, yesterday we mentioned the first meeting of the Defence Select Committee. I just thought, we didn't know yesterday who exactly was on that, but they have now released the list of names. I don't know if you know too many of these, Alex. There's, the chairman is Dr. Julian Lewis. We've got Leo Doherty MP, sorry, Martin Doherty Hughes, Mark Francis, Graham Jones, Johnny Mercer, Madeleine Moon, Gavin Robinson. So Madeleine Moon's back on there again.
Yeah,
Brian.
yes, the social worker, now defence expert.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Ruth Smith, John Speller, and Phil Wilson. I don't know too many of those. Obviously, Johnny Mercer is a local Plymouth MP, ex-Royal Marine, and so on. But Alex, do you know any of those names?
Only the UK column's old friend Madeleine Moon, the Swansea MP, who threatened to get all lawyerly with us over our suicide cluster coverage. And I'd also say I know Ruth Smeeth peripherally, in that she's one of these Blairite type MPs who got in a lot of hot water with a much more Corbynista constituency party recently, and I think she's been quite a war drum neocon type as well. But the rest are complete ciphers to me. Quite remarkable that there's two called Doherty on the panel. Yeah. Or on the committee.
Well, yes. Well, I think the other's a double-barrel name. But anyway, okay. Let's move on to this. This is a Henry Jackson Society and spectacular report from them here. It's called "Towards Global Britain: Challenging the New Narratives of National Decline." And of course, Global Britain is the hashtag that the government is wanting to use at every opportunity at the moment as they develop their international trade deals. And with those international trade deals, of course, comes Department for International Development money in other directions and soft power and so on. Well, what is Henry Jackson Society saying? They're saying that Britain is actually the second most powerful nation on the planet, second only to the United States. They're saying that the reality of British geopolitical capability means Britain is poised to thrive post-Brexit. They say that they're challenging the new narratives of national decline. They're taking aim at these declinist narratives. They set out why the UK has strengths across a range of areas that will empower it in the years ahead, including in its economy, military and culture. And it goes along with a second report, which is linked from this article. But I just wanted to get your thoughts, both you and Brian and Alex, on the idea that Britain is the second most powerful nation on the planet. Well,
my first reaction, Mike, is that this is absolutely laughable, because in a military sense we've seen nothing but decline, albeit that we still have nuclear weapons. But the state of the British military at the moment is in a very serious position. We've lost our manufacturing base. We don't produce anything. We could go on and on. So what's the Henry Jackson Society talking about? Are they talking about the Britain we think we live in, or are they talking about a different Britain? Are they talking about this corporate global Britain, which is working with corporate global America? Is that what they're talking about?
Well, I believe it is, but as well as that, Alex, of course, they're talking about geopolitical capability, and if Britain's geopolitical capability over the decades and centuries has to a large extent been based on trying to undermine other nations and playing duplicitous games.
And particularly, of course, Mike, it's been based on us trying to beat the French to the juiciest bits of territory, which we usually manage to do. And the thing about the Henry Jackson Society is that it studiedly ignores the French, because they're a different part of the deep state than the ones which have signed the Franco-British 50-year plan that UK Column covered in 2010 uniquely. The HJS is much more tied into American senators, the neocon idea, and friendship with Israel. And so they have this fond idea, which is a narrative they're increasingly projecting in the face of reality, which is that the Anglo project, or you could call it the Anglo-Tel Aviv project in some ways, is going to carry on being the world's best brand, even though quite literally now we're as it were, an unsinkable battleship with some empty aircraft carriers floating off it. But apparently that's all that's needed, because these global interests that Sir Brian is talking about are much more interested in the brand projection than they are in actual hardware. So this is a part of the establishment which is never going to get near the actual bridgehead and invasion stuff of the British potential, which is much more tied in these days inevitably with having to cooperate with the French. It's quite a sad state of affairs, I think, but they're going off into cloud cuckoo land.
Yeah, indeed. Quick advertisement. A few months ago, the Frome Stop War Group held an event called Media on Trial in Frome. It was very well attended. It was an excellent event. Patrick Henningsen, Peter Ford, Vanessa Beeley, Piers Robinson, Robert Stewart, Tim Hayward were speaking. They are now going to be joined by John Pilger to present a second edition of Media on Trial. This is going to take place in London, this time in Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church. Fantastic venue, actually. So that's going to take place on the 19th of October, Thursday the 19th of October at 7 p.m. So do get along to that if you're in the London area. I think it's going to be a very interesting evening.
And of course, we need more of this, more challenging of the media, the mainstream media, as it likes to call itself, every opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's come back to the subject of prisons, and I'm going to thank our viewers and listeners for the response we've had from our latest reports on Melanie Shaw. This is an article from back in 2000. This is a current article. I'm going to show you another one in a minute, which is back from 2016. But we've got a prison officer who says she was threatened with a syringe as inmates armed with table legs launched a riot and began hurling TVs out of windows. This was HM Prison Birmingham, and details of this are now starting to come out. This young lady says she was working on the jail's end wing, and she told jury how she was threatened with a syringe as hundreds of raging prisoners took over a block. Some of those prisoners now appearing in court again as a result of what took place within the prison. I'm just going to highlight here the word sparked, but because according to this lady, the riot was sparked by inmates climbing onto the suicide netting. I think there's got to be something a lot deeper behind it. There must have been things going on in the prison that meant that the men wanted or caused them to react in this way. But a very slack article by the Mail, because there's no analysis at all of what conditions were like in the prison. Now, if we come back to this one, this is 2016. We've got a major BBC News article about a transsexual prisoner, Tara Hudson, who said that she was treated like a zoo animal after being placed in a male prison. And what interested us is in the article, Susie Diamond White, the governor of HMP Eastwood Park, that's the prison where Melanie Shaw is now incarcerated, is quoted, and she is saying with regard to the handling of this trans prisoner that a one-size-fits-all policy approach will simply not work. So it's amazing that we've got a full report by the BBC on Tara Hudson, who happens to be a transsexual, but of course the BBC simply will not report on Melanie Shaw, child abuse whistleblower. But if we come back to the prison, here's the governor, Ms. Diamond White, and as we pointed out yesterday, she wanted longer sentences to help female abuse inmates. We said that what was the treatment Melanie Shaw was getting as an abuse victim? Well, she was locked in solitary. She's denied toiletries, telephone calls, books, reading material, or education facilities. But when we come across to the transgender issues, the boss of that prison had got a lot to say. She says a basic set of guidelines is always wasteful, and actually we should assess the people as individuals and look at what their needs are. I smell hypocrisy here, Mike. She goes on to say she would prefer to maintain people as individuals, and transgender people are at different states of transition, and they have different backgrounds, and they're in different states, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. A lot of common purpose, so-called speak, I think, coming out here. But what a difference if the subject is transgender all over the BBC, but if it's Melanie Shaw denied her rights, not a squeak. Well, what was interesting in the article was this gentleman was quoted. Now, this is the 2016 article when Ben Howlett was a member of Parliament. He lost his seat at the last election, but in the article of 2016, he's quoted as an MP. He's saying that more prisoners are given a fair allocation of accommodation now while serving their sentence. But he says that the issue is systematic of how much prejudice, discrimination, misunderstanding there is around trans community in today's society. So an MP who was on the Women and Equality Select Committee, very big on the transgender issue, but of course we're not seeing anything in relation to Melanie Shaw. But what we picked up on here, and this starts to join some of our news, was the fact that he is talking about being connected with public policy projects. Now, this is a, what is this? This is a think tank, really. It says here, we've got some details, how we work. We offer strategic advice about the opportunities presented by the policy landscape. And it goes on to say they work in partnership with Lang Buisson. And if we go through and see what they're doing, they're selling basically material to health companies principally. And it says here that we give advice on the likely impact of health and care policy on the operations and future planes of a particular business. So this is selling policy information in order to help people make money through the health and care system. And I was intrigued that this former MP, now very big with this organisation. This is the links through public policy projects and into Lang Buisson. This is what they say they're about, which is healthcare intelligence, looking at market structures, policy, etc. But this is all about making money. And if we have a look in a bit more of the detail here, I was interested in this bit because it then says insights from our independent cross-party Westminster think tank public policy project.
So, sorry, is it an independent think tank or is it a cross-party Westminster think tank?
Well, this is what's not clear because at the moment I can't tell whether Mr. Hewlett was involved while he was an MP, which would make it very interesting. What we can only see is that we've got big business working through people who've got deep inside knowledge through Westminster. So we start off looking at prisons, but we find it tied up in a web to do with health. And then if we get into the people, it gets very interesting indeed because we've got a banking fraternity here. These are very high-level bankers. And the gentleman on the left, we've got the chairman, the Right Honourable Stephen Terrill. He's also chair of the NHS Confederation, the authentic voice of the NHS leadership. So he speaks for all the people employed by the NHS, but he's also part of a lobbying think tank which is helping others to make money on healthcare through what the government policy is. This is very devious stuff, in my opinion.
Alex, just remind me who Stephen Terrill was. Was he actually Health Secretary at one point?
He was indeed. I'm just looking up the rest of his record. There he was. He was Shadow Secretary of State for Employment and Health, and then he was John Major's last Health Secretary, and up until the time of the Blairite landslide. And it's only after that that he got into the banking world that Brian describes. He was also a patron of the Tory Reform Group, and for the last 3 years he's been a consultant with KPMG, which is one of the major big three auditors, KPMG's Health and Public Service practice. So he's got right into selling his old expertise.
And what I find disturbing is, of course, that we've now got these health organisations buried deep inside the prison system, as the prison system's been privatised. Melanie Shaw couldn't get treatment, even though we supposedly have this wonderful benefit system via private companies. And as we look through the material, I'll just finish on this bit here. But as we look through this material, one of the things that we find they're referring to, of course, is the NHS European office. And it's pointing out here, this is still on the website. So clearly, as far as the NHS is concerned, we're not coming out of Europe. What is the statement here? That the influence of European policy on the NHS is so great the NHS had to open a European office. So just remarkable. We start off with a story on prisons, but as we follow the people through, what we come into is the big banking interest and the way that they are using people within the Westminster system in order to make yet more profit. Meanwhile, Melanie Shaw stays in solitary confinement, and the prison governor is not interested in her plight.
Indeed. A couple of lighter-hearted articles here. Flu crisis, UK hospitals braced for pressurised flu season this winter. This headline is purely on the basis of what happened in the Southern Hemisphere over the past few months. It's winter down there, of course. So I was just wondering, is this about a genuine potential crisis, or is this an attempt? Maybe they're a bit undersubscribed for the flu vaccine this year, Brian.
Well, we've just covered that very nicely, Mike, because of course the interest of all these health companies is profit. The government's policy at the moment is vaccination wherever it can, and that equals more profit for these lobbying, the companies and their lobbying interests.
Now, if anybody hasn't seen this story already, you better hold on to your hats, because Jamie Dimon has made some comments about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies that may be considered as the largest example, the biggest example of hypocrisy ever. Sorry, I've labelled that as Chief Operating Officer JP Morgan. Of course, he's Chief Executive Officer for JP Morgan. He said that Bitcoin is a fraud. It's going to blow up. Now, I'm not necessarily going to disagree that it's going to blow up at some point. I think it is a bit of a bubble, but how far it still has to go remains to be seen. I think if I just say what concerns me about it is that it's not really being used very much for actual commercial activity. It's kind of people mining Bitcoins and people investing in Bitcoins with a view to making a profit. So I don't see too much commercial activity outside of sort of the dark web. But anyway, Jamie Dimon saying unbelievably hypocritical things here, because he's saying it's a fraud. It's not a fraud. He said the currency isn't going to work. You can't have a business where people can invent a currency out of thin air and think that people are buying it are really smart.
Which is what the whole banking industry is about, Mike.
Well, absolutely. This is exactly the point. So
just brilliant.
So he said that if any JP Morgan traders were found to be trading in any cryptocurrency, that he would fire them in a second for two reasons. It's against their rules and they are stupid. And both are dangerous, he said. So there you go. So, well, this is perhaps needs to be seen in the context of this, because the Financial Times here pointing out that the penny has dropped for central banks on cryptocurrencies. They are saying that the cryptocurrencies are disrupting the payment system, and that's giving policymakers pause for thought. They say behind the scenes there's growing uneasiness about how disruptive technology may be to the banking and payment system. Over the summer, both the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision and the World Economic Forum put out lengthy papers on their concerns and the state of play. And yet, it has to be said that central banks are jumping on blockchain. We mentioned blockchain earlier on with regard to internet governance. Blockchain is being seen as a potential key technology for the banking system in the future. So Dimon's hypocrisy, unbelievable, because we should perhaps see it in the light of this article, which also came out today on Sky News, finance sector, an accident waiting to happen. This is a report from the Adam Smith Institute. 10 years on from the run on Northern Bank, it says a study finds stress tests to measure the banking sector's health are too weak. And this follows on from the Bank of England over the last couple of weeks has been pushing out a new website or a new article it has on the Bank of England website about how great their stress tests are, about how the banking crash that happened in 2007, 2008 couldn't possibly happen again because of the stress tests. But the Adam Smith Institute saying that the Bank of England is talking nonsense. Their stress tests aren't strong enough. And as a final comment to Jamie Dimon, of course, I don't remember Bitcoin having to be bailed out by the government at any point in the past, no. Whereas I believe JP Morgan was one of the main recipients of bailout money.
Minor detail, Mike. Well, let's have a look at what the government is up to, and this is This has appeared in several places, but I don't think people are really understanding the significance. So we got the BBC reporting the government wins committee change vote. Part of the article is that people are saying this is an undemocratic power grab, hence the blue headline there. But essentially the vote will give the Tories a majority on the public bill committees in charge of the detailed scrutiny of legislation. Opposition MPs have said it was constitutional outrage, a power grab from a government lacking a Commons majority. Labour's Angela Eagle said the DUP deal did not entitle the government to gerrymander the selection of standing committees in order to make life easier. And controversial changes giving the government control of key parliamentary committees have been agreed by MPs. Well, what are they really up to? Well, this is the detail of it. The bill has table stated that the Commons rules will be changed so that where a committee has an odd number of members, the government shall have a majority, and where a committee has an even number of members, the number of government and opposition members shall be equal. But this instruction shall not apply to the nomination of any public bill committee. And just before you comment there, Mike, I'll just take you to the bottom. The comment here is that this would allow Miss May to force through legislation without fear of opposition amendments if Tory committee members remain loyal.
Well, that's very interesting. So, government, these are select committees, is that right?
These are the committees particularly detailed to look at legislation. So in the passage of a bill, in fact, if I just bring this up quickly, people can research this for themselves on the government website. Here's the public bill committees and talking about them and how they're set up. It says the composition of the committees must match the size of the parties in the House. And this is the main point. The rule is that the committees must match the size of the parties in the House. The Tories have used DUP in order to say, no, we're not going to play that game. We're actually, we're going to have the opportunity to override this principle. So there's more detail here about when the committees are used. If a bill originates in Westminster or the House of Lords, you can read it here with the details. But this is a small thing in some ways, but a very big thing in other ways, because of course it's giving a minority government even more power. What Theresa May had to say was this, is what we're doing is ensuring the government's working majority is available across the business in Parliament. Well, that says it all, isn't it? Because basically she's saying we don't really care, we're a minority government, we're going to ensure that we can do whatever business we, the Tories, think. So I put the proper words in here. Don't bother me with minor details that Conservatives do not have an elected majority as a result of a general election. Stuff the voters. They need to do as they're told. This is what's actually happening. And I'll bring in Vince Cable with some reticence. This is what he said. It's very worrying. You have a minority government seeking to impose its will in this really quite authoritarian way. One of the most revealing episodes about this legislation at the moment is people who spent their whole lives in Parliament talking about parliamentary sovereignty, notice the words, are now selling it down the river. So there's a mixed message in what he's saying, but he is actually pointing out that something pretty dangerous is going on here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Alex, I can see the expression on your face. We should be very concerned about these changes in Westminster.
I don't think the timing is at all random, Brian, in these changes, and I don't actually think that it is triggered only by the minority government situation that has almost been foisted upon us, except that the UP have bailed out the government. No, I think this is actually the two arms of the Great Brexit swindle coming together, and I'm indebted to S. Williamism's channel, where he wanders around central London giving constitutional and historical insights. But he's helped me to see with renewed clarity, and he said it back in February, I just discovered the relevant video, that Brexit was an incredible opportunity to redesign the constitution. In fact, he said it in other videos, and I know that other people have said it too, so that from the European Union's point of view, we become effectively an offshore colony. to pacify us or the anti-EU majority of our population. But from the domestic point of view, we plasticize, as he puts it, everything that we used to have, so that we have a plasticized, almost laminated version of the rule of law, plasticized parliament, plasticized committees, with, in fact, due to this great repatriation or repeal bill, the government in the role that the European Commission had heretofore, which is basically dictating above and beyond the legislators. So you can see what's coming in here. Common law is going to be scrapped. And the other arm, which I think is coming together, which you've also focused on in the middle of your news, is the city. We're going to end up with a soft Brexit deal in the end. All the hard Brexit stuff is for show, it's for the masses' consumption. A lot of sources are telling me that. And why is that? It's because ultimately the city, which controls our politicians, is determined that European Union legislation, and particularly French intrigue, is not going to get in the way of untrammeled city money-making and the city doing whatever it wants, unspeakable things besides the money-making. So the thing is all of a piece, and I think it will take another year to 18 months before it's clear exactly how we've been stitched up.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Are we gonna end in this one, Brian, or will we?
Yes, we will, since it ties in very nicely with the city. Okay,
so this is the Mirror saying that millions are worried that they will have to work until at least 70 before they can afford to retire. So this is about pensions. They say more than 5 million over 50s are worried that they'll have to work until they're at least 70 before they've saved enough to retire. 1 in 4 expect to carry on toiling into their 70s, and more than 1 in 10 think they will never fully retire. And this is, well, you know, this. Frankly, you heard it at the UK on the UK column first, because we've been talking about this for a very long time. British private pensions are underfunded. They're, I believe, they're a scam, which steal huge amounts from people in fees and charges. And of course, public pensions aren't even funded at all. And we've been making this point for quite some time. The black hole in public and state pensions, £5 trillion. But on top of that, of course, we've got the great news of falling unemployment in this country. But the question is, again, a point that I've been trying to make for a long time, what kind of jobs are people getting? They're getting low quality, low wage jobs, which means less money for pensions, whether that's because they don't have money to put into private pensions, or because they don't have money to pay in taxes, which of course then goes to fund the state pension scheme. So this issue of pensions, Brian and Alex, is a policy decision that has been made. As we see the quality of jobs in this country decline, then the level of savings that people can maintain for their futures also declines, and therefore people have no choice but to continue working until effectively they drop dead. And of course, part and parcel of that is the recognition of an aging population and the fact that the whole issue of social care. If people are working until they're 80, then they won't be requiring social care because they are going to work and pay for themselves until they die.
Yeah, and if they fall ill, then what we're seeing at the moment is those people are going to die. We're now being told you can die of dementia. Well, how does that work? And we're seeing property stripped away from elderly people who've gone into care homes, gone into the social services system. So we can see that the government at the moment is already working extremely hard to strip away wealth, care home costs, and of course to take property. This is engineered policy, Alex, without question.
Yes, Brian, and the idea is that people will be grateful for any scraps of work they can be given. You see the same in the States, although at this stage it's mainly the deliberately careerist, selfish types who find themselves having spent the resources when they're 70 and carrying on having to work when their bodies are broken and their minds can't concentrate anymore. But it is coming into the mainstream in the US, and I think it's following into Europe. It's nothing new in the second world or the third world that people have the expectation there that they have to keep working till they drop, just how it was in Britain until the 18th century. And wherever you are, any time or place, there's only really 3 remedies for the individual who doesn't have great connections. Pensions that are secure are either progeny, so children and grandchildren who you can culturally depend upon to look after you, or precious metals, or land. Now, the problem is all 3 of those can be stolen in such a corrupt system as modern Britain. But those are the 3 options you have if you don't want to be diddled.
Yeah. Alex, thank you very much for that.
That's it.
That's it. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We'll just say, if you listen to UK column news and you're getting a better picture of what's really going on in Britain today, the next question is what to do about it. And the answer to that is expose it. Keep pushing out the information, keep alerting other people, warning them, showing them where the truthful information is, because exposure is at least 95% of the battle. Hence the government's panic over the use of the internet to push out factual information and truthful information. We'll also say, if you're not a subscriber to UK Column, we need your financial help to keep doing what we do. We do want to expand. We can only do that with your financial help. So if you're not a subscriber, please get on the website and subscribe. If you can donate, thank you very much. All donations very welcome. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.